One of the issues roguelike games face is they all follow very similar rules, which means when making one, you need to find a way to differentiate your game from the masses of other similar games out there. One of the ways this is done is by changing what I call the level of variability or consistency in the game. Variable games rely more on picking up unique items that change your character's abilities in fundamental ways that shape how you approach combat. They put more focus on the uniqueness of their items instead of the uniqueness of their characters. Consistent games, however, focus more on having unique abilities across their characters that are not majorly changed by any items you pick up. While the items may not change the fundamentals of your characters like they do in variable games, the fundamental abilities of your unique character changes what items you prioritize in collecting throughout your run. I think a good way to understand this is by comparing The Binding of Isaac with Risk of Rain 2. Two of my favorite roguelike games, but for different reasons. I also want to note here that I'm using the term roguelike in a very loose way. I know about the Berlin interpretation, which adds 8 specific rules to qualify a game as an official roguelike, but the main qualifiers for me are if you die, you restart back at the beginning, and there are procedurally generated dungeons or levels for you to collect items in that you move through which get progressively more difficult. So The Binding of Isaac was my introduction to roguelike games, and I feel its main feature that draws people in is the variability in items and item synergies across runs. Basic idea behind The Binding of Isaac is that you explore a dungeon shooting your tears as a weapon against enemies to make your way to the next level, and at every new level you have opportunities to pick up new items that can affect your stats or change what abilities your tears have, and then you have to kill the boss at the end of the floor to move on to the next floor. Most runs start the same, with just basic tiers for attack, but as you get new items, it changes how you approach combat. A good example of seeing how the items affect your tiers in gameplay is looking at the Polyphemus item versus Soy Milk. Polyphemus lowers your rate of fire to basically nothing, but increases your damage and tier size immensely. Soy Milk does the opposite. You shoot rapid fire tiny tiers that have little knockback and next to no damage and a tight pattern. This is a basic example, but there are many variations you can have on tiers. Brimstone shoots a giant laser of blood, or the Ludovico technique has you controlling one giant floating tier you can move around anywhere in the room, and this changes how you might approach combat as well. For example, Brimstone can shoot through rocks while regular tiers cannot, so it changes where the best place to position your character is. Or with the Ludovico technique, if you also have an ability that grants you flight, you can sit on top of a rock and a large number of the enemies in the game will be unable to hit you while you move your telekinetic tier around the room, killing them. The items can synergize as well. And this can compound very quickly as there are tons of items that can change how your tiers work. Like if you get Brimstone and the Ludovico technique, then instead of one tier you control telekinetically or shooting a laser in a straight line, you get a giant blood laser circle that does damage every frame it touches an enemy that you can freely move around the room like the Ludovico technique tier. Another cool thing Isaac does is if you get enough items of a certain category, it can transform your character, giving them new abilities. The original of these is Guppy. If you get 3 Guppy-related items, you turn into Guppy the Cat, which grants you flight, and every time you do damage, you spawn blue flies, which kamikaze themselves into enemies for huge damage. It's just another added layer of variability that also can shift what items you are prioritizing. The combinations of items gives nearly limitless potential, which creates nearly limitless replayability. There's a great YouTube channel, SlayXC2, that showcases tons of different cool builds, which demonstrates this point exactly, showcasing the coolest, craziest, game-breaking combos they can think of. I'll link their channel in the description. It's fun to see this difficult game just get utterly demolished. It took me so long in the original Binding of Isaac to beat the first main boss, so when you come back with a busted build, it really gives a textured sense of your own progression. Risk of Rain 2, on the other hand, privileges consistency over variability. Risk of Rain 2 is similar to Isaac. You start on level 1, kill enemies, get items, and kill the boss to teleport to the next level. But one of the main differences of the two is that Risk of Rain 2 has fewer items, but the characters are far more distinct from one another. Each of the playable characters have their own unique abilities, and the items you collect add aspects to these, but don't necessarily change the base ability in the way Brimstone would, for example. Comparing Isaac and Judas in Binding of Isaac shows only a few differences between the two. Isaac has more base health and starts with a bomb, while Judas has lower base health but higher damage, and the Book of Belial, but still both use the same tiers to kill the guys, and the items affect their tiers in identical ways. In Risk of Rain 2, if you compare the Engineer to Loader, they have fundamentally different styles of playing the game because of their unique character abilities. Engineer is more stationary, with very little in the way of mobility, but the turret abilities allow you to bunker down against the boss in one spot. Loader, however, is flying around the map like fucking Spider-Man with a giant mech arm smacking motherfuckers. I don't know if you could tell, but I definitely prefer Loader over Engineer. But the main difference in their playstyles means that the way you prioritize items is much different than Isaac, as it is character dependent in Risk of Rain 2. Rather than the items you get altering your playstyle, the playstyle is affected by the character you choose, and this in turn changes the items you should focus on getting. For Loader specifically, the Focus Crystal is one of the best items. What it does is gives a flat increase to damage if you are hurting enemies within a few feet radius of you. With Loader's main form of attack being melee, this basically means that every single attack has bonus damage from the Focus Crystal. For Engineer, the Focus Crystal is basically worthless, because your main form of damage is in the form of ranged turrets and bombs, meaning you never get the bonus damage from the Focus Crystal because your enemies are always further outside of that range. Compare this to the Bustling Fungus item, which gives you rapid health regen when standing still for more than 2 seconds. Loader never sits still, their survival is tied to their mobility and quick drive-by attacks, while the Engineer's playstyle is designed around setting up turrets to sit in one location. A cool fact about Engineer is the items also affect their turrets, meaning when you have enough Bustling Fungi, your turrets become near unkillable with the passive health regen they gain. The character you choose fundamentally shifts how you approach getting items in the game and what you prioritize because of their consistent abilities. There are some items that transcend this, like the teddy bear gives every character a chance to take 0 damage when they get hit, and that's always good, or the fireworks make it so whenever you open a container, homing fireworks shoot out in all directions, but there are certain items that are geared towards certain characters, which creates different playstyles. This also means that the extrinsic motivation to unlock new characters in Risk of Rain is greater than in Isaac. In Isaac, if any character sees Polyphemus as the first item, they're fucking grabbing it, because the characters basically all have the same starting tiers, and this upgrade helps them all equally. I should mention here that the character choice in Isaac is not quite as simple as I made it out to be. In the original Binding of Isaac, the different characters just had different base stats and a few unique starting items, but all of them still had basic tiers as their ability. In the latest versions of Isaac, there are some characters with unique abilities. Lilith is one that comes immediately to mind. She is blindfolded so she can't shoot tears, but has a companion buddy that shoots tears, and you have a book that duplicates the number of companions you have for that room. So you have to change how you approach the rooms based on your character's core abilities like a consistent game, and you will prioritize more buddy items based on that character like a consistent game. But overall, the character choice matters much less than in Risk of Rain 2, as the majority of characters just use basic tiers and high mobility to avoid the bullet hell obstacles, while Risk of Rain 2 has such a wide variety of characters and viable playstyles that makes discovering a new character exciting in a way that Isaac just never really achieved for me. I should also mention that I said the items in Risk of Rain 2 don't fundamentally change your character's base abilities, but this is only half true. There are some special items that cost moon coins, which replace entire abilities, but these are very specific circumstances, and there are much fewer items that change core abilities in Risk of Rain 2 than we see in Isaac. It's mostly an extra kind of thing. My average Risk of Rain 2 run doesn't grab a single moon coin item, while in Isaac, basically every run I do ends with different tier abilities. There are also less items overall in Risk of Rain 2, with about 186, while the latest version of Isaac has a whopping 719. So that's a very basic layout of the idea. Variability focuses on changing the character's core abilities in crazy ways through items, while consistent gameplay focuses on having your character's core abilities guide what items you should collect. They seem to be on mutually exclusive sliders. As you add more variability to the game, the consistency falls lower, and as you add more consistency, the variability falls lower. Every roguelike I can think of has at least some aspects of both, but they may weigh them differently in import, which helps differentiate roguelikes from one another, and both models have their advantages and disadvantages. Like I said, a lot of the fun of Binding of Isaac comes from the wacky combos you can make, but that only really comes together in the latter half of any given run. I mean, sure, it's true that every roguelike, the latter half is more fun, but with Binding of Isaac, the first half can be really kind of a slog. Most of my time playing Isaac is spent resetting the first level over and over, looking for a decent damage up item, because clearing the first 2 floors on basic starting damage is just a fucking pain. And even if you make it out, there's not a guarantee that the items you find later will be any more helpful. It's certainly possible, and not even really all that difficult, to beat the first 2 floors without much in the way of good items, but there comes a point in the game where you hit the womb, and enemies start doing double damage, and if you don't have a good enough build, you're basically shit out of luck. Another classic situation I find myself in is I'll have a killer run going with an awesome synergy, but then I pick up an item that just completely breaks my build. The first item that comes to mind is that stupid fucking eye charge item. It lets you charge up your tiers to release 5 at a time, which is pretty good ability, but every time you take damage, it has a chance to teleport you back to the previous room you were in. Runs become difficult because you go in, kill some guys, take damage, then are teleported out, you go back into the room you were just teleported out of, and all the enemies you just killed have respawns, but the only difference is now you're down half a heart, and you rinse and repeat this over and over. Just in general, there are some items that feel more like a downgrade than an upgrade. Finding the bean, which is an item that makes you have a low damaging toxic fart on use, kind of feels like a slap in the face with how many other useful reusable items there are in the game. All this creates a problem with momentum. When the game is good, it's amazing. You're flying through all these enemies that you've died to over and over, shooting them with a brimstone beam that homes in on every enemy because you got the bent spoon, and then you find Tammy's head, so every time you press spacebar in a room, it just gets filled with brimstone everywhere and just fucking annihilates bosses in half a second. These are the moments where it all comes together and you feel rewarded for the effort you've put in, but getting to that point takes a lot of slow gameplay and resetting. With Risk of Rain 2 and more consistency, this becomes much less of a problem. Going in, your moves are always the same, basically throughout the entire run. Of course, outside of the moon coin items that I mentioned earlier. And yes, when you're on the second loop and have tons of items that proc effects and can move faster and deal higher damage, it's more fun, and this does change how you approach the map somewhat. But at its fundamental core, your abilities are still the same as on the first floor. Having less reliance on items means you don't need to reset a million times looking for mom's knife. Instead, you can just jump in and go, but you'll never get that excitement you feel when you find a really busted item in Isaac, or when you pick up an item that you don't think will do anything, but synergizes in a way that you didn't expect with an item you already have. There's a sacrifice of this exploratory experimentation in more consistent games. But when a run in Isaac feels like it's doomed, it was possibly because of player error, taking unnecessary damage and the like, but also a large possibility is that the items you were given just aren't enough to carry an average player over the finish line. Conversely, in Risk of Rain 2, when a run feels doomed, it is almost always because of player error. Enemies' difficulty is not entirely based on what floor you are on, like in Isaac, but is rather based on the total amount of time you have spent on that run. If you spend your time inefficiently, you won't have enough opportunities to get the helpful items that boost your stats, and you'll fall behind the enemy's level of progression. It wasn't because you weren't given good items to work with, but rather because you made a mistake in your time management, which feels like a more legitimate reason to have failed. I will say, sometimes I just can't find the teleporter in Risk of Rain 2, and it's incredibly frustrating watching the difficulty level increase on an empty map where you just can't find the teleporter for the life of you. But this is one of those things that becomes easier with time as you learn the levels and where teleporters may spawn and such. Speaking on the topic of failure, failure doesn't always have to be fair in video games. A classic example is the mimics in Dark Souls. I know it's been said a million times at this point, but first-time players have no way of knowing that some chests are an instant kill outside of experiencing it and then learning the lesson of, shit, that was terrifying, I gotta smack every fucking chest from here on out. The unfairness was in service of a lesson. Dark Souls intentionally creates a hostile world that tries to trick the player, which makes an engaging experience, because every enemy has the ability to do tons of damage in that game, and they could be hiding around any corner or punish you for hastily attempting to get a treasure chest. In Isaac, there certainly is some unfair failure in service of larger lessons, particularly early players learning all the attack patterns of each enemy and all the bosses, and learning all the room layouts. Without having any prior experience, this can feel really unfair, but a lot of the engagement of real-time roguelikes is that process of mastering the enemies and the rooms and the bosses. But when you aren't provided any good enough items to stand a chance on the later floors, this feels unfair simply out of poor luck, which is very frustrating in a genre of games designed to reward skill. A bit of a digression there, but back to Risk of Rain 2. Another aspect of the game that lessens the reliance on items is the fact that as you kill enemies, you level up, increasing your damage and max health, which adds another form of consistent progression. No matter what items you have gotten, you get stronger. Even if you don't get the items that complement your character specifically, there's usually still enough from other items and levels that you can just stay ahead of the damage curve. In Isaac, you get one item room per floor, a boss item, and maybe a devil/angel room. There are a few other ways of getting items like lock chests and secret rooms, but often those are more utility items like the noose, which grants you the ability to fly, versus mom's knife, which you can only really find in item or devil rooms, and that just pretty much breaks the game. This makes Risk of Rain 2 less reset heavy, because by the time items really start to matter, you'll have had plenty of opportunities to get those items. I feel the replayability of consistent games is not quite as high as variable games though. After I unlocked all the Risk of Rain characters, I definitely felt a lot less inclined to keep playing, because if I've experienced Loader at peak power once, it's not going to be that much different if I do again. One cool thing Risk of Rain does to help this is it gives you specific tasks that can unlock alternate abilities for your characters, so you can mix and match a few different styles based on those new abilities. But unlocking the new abilities never enticed me quite so much as unlocking a brand new character. Binding of Isaac has a similar issue where once I have unlocked the D6 for Isaac, I usually am less inclined to play, but there are like 29 different endings to Isaac, and every time you get an ending with a specific character, it unlocks a new item, so pretty much every time I play through a complete run, I unlock some new item, and I was always excited to unlock new items in Isaac. Also in the later DLCs like Afterbirth and such, Isaac has added a ridiculous amount of new routes and final bosses and challenges. It's hard to claim there's nothing left to do after getting the D6 at this point. Risk of Rain 2 also adds challenges in hidden areas, which is always fun to explore as well, but it doesn't have it to the same extent that Isaac does. Roguelike games are inherently very replayable though, as they are designed to be played from the start every single time, but as I have been discussing, it is achieved in different ways. I don't really believe one of these styles is necessarily better or worse than the other objectively, but subjectively, I think I do prefer the consistency of Risk of Rain 2. Even though I've put significantly less hours into that game, I can say most of those hours were enthralling fights with unique characters, while a significant number of hours in Isaac is just resetting to get a better run that might get ruined by shit items later. If I had to put percentages onto these games, I'd say Isaac is 90% variable and 10% consistent in its design, while Risk of Rain 2 is 80% consistent and 20% variable in its design. Alright, so that's the idea in a nutshell, but now that we've gone over the concept, I'd like to apply it to some of my other favorite roguelike games and see how consistent or variable they are. I'm just going to analyze specifically under the framework of variability versus consistency, mainly looking at how the movesets and items affect approaches to gameplay. Some of these games I've put well over 100 hours into, and some I've only put 15 or so into, so sorry if there are some major points I missed out on for some of these games, and feel free to educate me about mechanics you think are worthwhile to the discussion in the comments. Alright, so let's start with Hades. I'd say Hades is about 65% consistent and 35% variable. Again, the basic idea is you kill enemies, get items, kill a boss, and move up to the next level of hell to eventually challenge the final boss. Instead of picking a unique character every run, you pick a unique weapon each run. Like Risk of Rain 2, each weapon has a unique moveset that significantly alters how the player will approach combat. Each of the weapons has the same basic moveset of basic attack, dash attack, and special, but each of these moves functions differently across the weapons. The starting weapon is the sword, which is very melee focused. You spend a lot of your time dash attacking around and slamming your special for an AoE attack. It's about closing the gap between you and your enemies as quickly as possible. While the bow, on the other hand, is obviously a range-based weapon. You're dashing away from enemies and you're lining up your shots and releasing your shot at the perfect moment when it shines for bonus damage. This creates a lot of replayability, wanting to try out all the weapons, and a lot of motivation to unlock all the weapons. It was certainly what excited me most about the game, the prospect of changing up my playstyle and seeing which one works best in different situations. As for the items you collect throughout the game, they mostly add a lot of solid vertical progression, with some minor horizontal progression aspect as well, which is very similar to Risk of Rain 2's items, and this keeps the game consistent, but there is one item that can completely alter how a moveset functions like Isaac's items do, which makes it more of a variable game than Risk of Rain 2. The way items work is that almost every room gives you a boon from one of the Greek gods, and these can do things like say increase your attack damage by 20%, and every time you attack it has a chance to activate a chain lightning effect that hurts other foes nearby. Or whenever you kill an enemy, your item might make it so that your next attack deals bonus damage, and these are certainly very helpful upgrades that do change up the approach to gameplay a bit. A cool thing they do with this as well is having different gods offer boons with unique effects to that god, allowing you to specialize into a specific god's boon type. If you really want a lot of lightning effects, you can aim to get more Zeus boons, or maybe you like the charm status effect Aphrodite's boons give your attacks, so you focus on getting her upgrades. There are also item upgrades that upgrade a certain god's effects. For Zeus, I mentioned some of his boons give you a chance to proc a chain lightning effect, but there are specific boons of Zeus's that upgrade the chain lightning effect of other boons of his you have gotten. The way these compound together certainly adds some variability into the game, but what really adds a lot is Hephaestus' hammer. Whenever you pick that up, it gives you 3 choices of upgrades that completely change how a move functions. A good example I got on one of my runs recently is the hammer changed my sword's attack from a 3-move combo that is relatively slow to a really fast 2-hit combo, which increases the speed of the first 2 attacks from the 3-hit combo. So I was just constantly swinging at enemies, but I lost the range of that final jab. This compounded well with another hammer effect I got later that shoots beams out of my sword every time I use the attack. The increased attack speed synergizes well with the constant attacking nature of the first item, and it helped with the low range of the attacks, allowing me to line up the enemies to have the beam cut through all of them. There are other hammer items that might do the opposite, like on the bow I got an item that slowed down the draw speed a bit but greatly increased the damage of the bow. It was interesting because unlike the upgraded sword I got, which really is about closing the distance between enemies as quickly as possible, this bow upgrade led to a much slower style of play where positioning further away from enemies was more important. There are of course upgrades for the bow with the hammer that make it better to close the distance and get in close. The hammer item adds more replayability to the game than any other aspect because they are also drastically variable. The other major aspect of variability is your cast attack. The cast works the same across all weapons. You have a limited number of uses of it, but the ammo for it drops on the ground so you can run and pick it up to recharge your cast. The basic cast is a little projectile that homes in on enemies and does a little bit of damage, but what's cool is every god has a unique boon that alters what the cast does. Ares' cast sends a set of spinning blades across the map, while Zeus's shoots a bolt of chain lightning that can bounce off of enemies. This allows more variability across runs, and based on the boons you get, this will change what moves you prioritize using. If you get a really powerful, cool cast, you might be trying to use that move as much as possible, while in another run, you might want to use your special that got upgraded by a hammer to do something really cool. The problem of trying to balance variability and consistency is if you go too middle of the road with both, you may lose what makes each of these styles special. While Hades' weapons aren't as diverse from one another as Risk of Rain 2's characters' movesets are, and while the variability of items is never going to reach the insanity of Isaac's, I still think it does a very good job walking that line and does succeed in getting the best aspect of both in its gameplay. Hades 2 is in early access now, and I've put in a number of hours, tried out a few different weapons and such, but still have not beaten it or sunk my teeth in enough to give too much of a detailed analysis. I'd say the biggest change from Hades 1 to Hades 2 is Hades 2 adds a mana system into the game, where you can use some to turn your moves into more powered up versions, and there are specific boons which empower the magical variation of moves. This definitely fleshes out the variability a lot, and overall the mechanics in the game feel like they are striving to flesh out the variability in the game. I think if I had to recommend somebody a first roguelike game to try out the genre, it would be Hades. Alright, so next I want to talk about FTL for a little bit. FTL is a bit different from the games we have been looking at so far, though I'd say it is about 80% consistent and 20% variable, like Risk of Rain 2 is. Basic idea is similar to the others, of course. You play as a spaceship and have to move through different solar systems to make it to the last system and fight a big boss there. But there are some major differences. Hades, Risk of Rain 2, and Isaac all have bosses at the end of each floor or world or level or whatever you want to call it, but FTL doesn't have any outside of the final boss. Technically, it's possible to get to the final boss without ever killing an enemy at all. At the beginning, you choose a spaceship from the ones you have unlocked, and each of them have various crew members, different rooms, and different weapon systems. You need to have your crew members in specific rooms to operate those systems. Some of them, like the weapon system, will work without an operator, just much less efficiently. Other systems, like the cockpit, won't function at all without somebody operating it. When you start the game, you have a map of the solar system and have to jump from location to location within that solar system to make your way to the exit of that system. At these locations, you'll find various events, like someone might want to trade rockets for fuel, or you find an abandoned space station and have to decide risking one of your crew members to explore the station, or playing it safe and moving on, but losing out on the resources of it. And of course, sometimes you run into an enemy ship. The way combat works is you have a certain amount of energy on your ship that needs to be dedicated to certain systems for them to work. The basic starting ship has a missile launcher that requires 1 energy, and a laser weapon that requires 2 energy. To use these, you need to have power within your weapon system as well, so you need to pay to increase the maximum amount of power that can be allocated to your weapon system, then pay to have that power, and then allocate that power to those weapons. So when you do attack the enemy ship, you choose a specific part of the enemy ship to attack and target with your weapons. You can attack the shield system to make the enemy ships vulnerable to direct attack. You can attack their weapon system to limit what weapons they can use, or maybe the enemy is trying to escape, so you attack their engine or cockpit. While this is all happening, of course, the enemy ship is attacking your systems as well, and when that happens, the systems get damaged and can't function, so you need to micromanage your crew to be repairing systems and putting out fires that pop up on the ship, while also keeping them alive, and making sure you are outdamaging your opponent, and ensuring your important systems are still manned throughout the flight, even if they are damaged. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the fight, you can have crew in the engine room to increase the rate at which your FTL drive charges, so you can leave the area to hopefully somewhere safer. Progression is very different from the other games. While the others have items in abundance, basically getting at least 1 or 2 items per floor, in FTL, you gather scrap as currency and can use this to upgrade your systems or buy new weapons/utilities to use. These weapons and utilities require energy to function, so you can either take energy out of other systems or spend scrap to buy more overall energy to be allocated. This means getting new weapons and systems happens very rarely. Everything costs scraps, from upgrades to repairing your ship, and everything is expensive as hell. Usually I only get 1 new weapon system added to my ship by the halfway mark, and only on really good runs where I make it to the end do I have enough scrap saved up to install a 2nd or 3rd weapon system. Usually my scrap is going to upgrading my shield system or repairing my hull. This changes how you approach exploration as well. You could, in theory, just rush to the edge of the solar system as fast as possible, but when you make it to the final boss, you're not going to have a good enough ship because you didn't get all the scrap from all those other places and all the potential encounters, so the final ship will just fucking demolish you. Conversely, you can't just hang out and go to every bit of each solar system, raking in all the scrap, because you are being chased by the Empire, or whatever the fuck they're called in this game. So every turn, they begin to encroach and take over the map. If you get caught in their controlled territory, there will be a ship there that is purposely designed to be better than your potential ship, meaning you need to escape as quickly as possible, or you are almost guaranteed to take some sort of damage or outright die in that fight. This all compounds to make the game very consistent. The ships each have their own specialty that doesn't change much throughout the run, simply is made stronger. There is variability across the ships for sure. The starting ship, as mentioned, has a rocket that can attack rooms through shields but costs ammo, and a laser that cannot penetrate shields but does consistent damage and costs no ammo. Another one of the ships is based around drones, so each fight it consumes some ammo called drone parts, and if you have enough, it deploys them to automatically attack or heal your ship or intercept attacks that are being targeted to you. I should mention you can get some bonus passive items as well. Like there's one that makes it so you get 15% less scrap every time you would get scrapped, but every time you do, your hull is healed a little bit. But these are mainly different forms of vertical progression rather than horizontal. You can also invest in buying new systems for your ship, which is obviously a very big horizontal form of progression. For example, you can get a teleporter that allows you to send some of your crew directly over into the enemy ship to sabotage systems and kill the enemy's crew. Or there's a stealth machine that every so often will make your ship invisible for a few seconds. This allows you to charge your weapons by aiming at the enemy's machines, but the enemy can't charge theirs because they can't aim at yours. These do add aspects of variability if you are willing to invest in them, but the price is so steep on them it becomes very difficult to compound systems together in the way items compound in Isaac, for example. If you're focusing on getting drones, you won't have scrap for new weapons, or if you get the stealth system, you might need to have less invested in your shields. This is a form of variability, an opportunity cost trade-off that is not seen nearly as much in the other games, but this also discourages experimentation and shuttles people down a few forms of progression that are repeated every run. I think the 2 main factors that guide what systems you prioritize are the ship you start with and what random items you stumble upon throughout your run. If you start with the drone ship, it makes sense to invest further in drones because you don't need to invest scrap into getting the drone system in the first place, and you start with the energy specifically allocated to that system already, so you avoid needing to buy more energy just to use the system at all. As for items, you will sometimes get new weapons or drones as rewards for encounters or just randomly stumbling upon them. This definitely guides your investment as well, because if you find a new weapon system and already have some scrap invested in your weapon systems, you can then add and use this new weapon much more easily. Conversely, if you have nothing invested in your weapon system and the weapon you need requires 3 bars of energy, you can sell the weapon to a shop and then get scrap for more drones or a weapon that requires less energy to function. This opportunity cost trade-off makes FTL very interesting, but overall somewhat discourages experimentation. Once you have started investing in a system, it is difficult to transition over to another system mid-run unless you get a ton of free weapons for that system. This may sound mostly like a negative, but overall I think it's simply a different type of progression. I really enjoy FTL. I mean, it's probably my least favorite of the games I have gone over so far, but the tactical element of choosing which systems to attack and managing your little guys in fights is really engaging, especially combined with the scrap management system, knowing that if you lose a crew member or take a lot of hull damage, that's a lot of scrap to be spent playing catch-up instead of progressing your systems. It makes getting hit really hurt. There's also less ambiguity in the items. Isaac is notorious for this. And Isaac, before you pick up the item, you just see its sprite. And after you pick it up, it tells you a little blurb about the effect of that item. And even then, the little blurb itself can be ambiguous as to specifically what the item is doing. And tons of items have secret effects, like they might increase your shot speed by a little bit, but it doesn't mention that in the blurb at all. There's a really cool mod that goes over, and whenever you pick up an item or about to pick up an item, it shows you specifically what it does on the side of your screen. I really recommend that if you have been playing Isaac for a while, but part of the fun of Isaac is, you don't know the items when you're first starting out, so you're experimenting and trying out different things. Bit of a digression there, but back to FTL real quick. FTL is also probably the hardest of the games I have listed so far, which definitely adds to the difficulty in experimentation. Sometimes you'll just hit a wall where there is no chance of beating the foe because you improperly explored the area before, or you just got unlucky and didn't get all the scrap you need, or the last 4 jumps have all been into difficult enemies with bad weather effects. Alright, let's move on to one that I've actually only recently started playing but really love, Into the Breach. So Into the Breach is made by the same people who made FTL, and like FTL, it is another game that definitely privileges consistency, and I think even more so than FTL or Risk of Rain 2. I would say it's 95% consistent with only 5% variability. Again, similar premise to the other games, you choose your team of guys that then have to clear islands through fights, and after clearing 80% of an island, the boss level of that island unlocks, which you have to clear to move on to the next island, and then after enough islands have been cleared, you challenge the final boss of the final island. The combat is turn-based, which is a change from the other games we have covered. And Into the Breach, each level is a grid map where enemies will spawn and try to attack your guys or the cities inhabiting the island. If enough cities die, you lose and have to restart, or if all of your characters die in a battle, you lose and have to restart. The enemy's moves are clearly telegraphed every turn. You know exactly what tile they are attacking and how much damage it will do, which is amazing because even with that omnipotent level of information, the game is still really challenging. The main draw, like Risk of Rain 2 and FTL, is in your character choice. There are like 20 different sets of characters to choose from and unlock. Each set has 3 units as a part of them. Usually, one of the units is a direct attacker, one of the units is more utility based, and one of them is more of a longer range attacker that's kind of like a siege sort of unit. Your attacks can directly hit the enemies, or they can be used to push the enemies into a different tile, which can have differing effects, like knocking an enemy into water to instantly kill them, or knocking an enemy into another enemy's attack path so they have friendly fire, or knocking them onto a tile where another enemy is going to rise out of the ground the next turn, and you block that from happening, which keeps the crowd more manageable, and it does a little bit of damage to the enemy that was over top of where the enemy was going to spawn. It can also be detrimental. If you hit an enemy into a city or one of your friendly units, it will do damage to them as well. As far as progression goes, if your guys stay alive through the fights, their pilots gain XP, which can give them more health or bonus effects, but there is also a currency called cores, which you rarely get, and they can be used to purchase more upgrades for your guys, like increased health, more damage for your weapons, or if you picked up a new weapon or upgrade, and needs cores to, power it. At the end of each island, you have stars, which are earned by doing bonus objectives on that island. These can be used to increase how many cities can be damaged before losing, or to purchase cores, or they can be used to buy brand new abilities for your units, which again need to be powered through the cores. Sometimes these abilities replace a move that your unit has with one from an entirely different unit, or sometimes it adds bonus effects to your abilities, like making your smoke heal friendly allies who move into them. Like FTL, it is a resource management kind of progression. Do I resupply my cities to allow for a greater margin of error, or do I upgrade my abilities so I can kill enemies more efficiently? The items play an even lesser role here than in FTL. Most runs I don't get any new form of attack, just additional aspects to the base starting attacks to make them stronger. The puzzle-like nature of the game makes unlocking new groups of units even more incentivized than most of the other games listed. They're all super unique and fundamentally shift how you approach combat on a very, very deep level. You can also mix and match units from different groups to make your own squad. This encourages the player to look at the unit's mechanics and find synergies even the devs may not have seen. Overall, the lack of item progression and focus on characters makes this game much more consistent of a roguelike. I think I enjoy this one a little more than FTL. It feels like there was a lot less luck in how many resources you get by de-emphasizing the resource aspect of it. Of course, you do lose the benefit of different builds having variability through items in runs, but there is so much variability across the characters and there are so many different characters to choose from, it makes the game incredibly satisfying. You'll have moments where the best choice is obvious, so your turn takes like 10 seconds, but other times, you'll be moving guys around and undoing it, trying to visualize the most effective moves your guys can make in that turn, and their abilities are so well defined and consistent, it always comes down to the player's ability to understand their tool set. It's really like chess in a lot of ways. It's testing your tactical strategy rather than your ability to memorize boss patterns and execute quick, precise movements like you see in almost every other game in the genre. So next up I want to talk about Enter the Gungeon. Enter the Gungeon is one that is much more similar to Isaac than the others on this list, and I'd say it sits around a similar split of 90% variable and 10% consistent. Like Isaac and Hades, it's a top-down, real-time bullet hell where you clear a floor, kill a boss, and move down to the next floor. As you move through the levels, you get keys to unlock chests, which have random items in them, and you get currency in the form of bullet shell casings, which can be spent at shops for keys, hearts, or more guns. The most enticing aspect of the game is certainly the wide variety of weapons and how so many of them reference other games. There's a water can gun that looks like it's from Stardew Valley. There's a Mario brick gun that literally shoots out Koopa shells. And there's a lot of cute wordplay, like they have a gun called the pea shooter that shoots peas. A lot of the weapons function and shoot like real guns, especially the ones based on real guns like the Dungeon Eagle or a lot of the shotguns and such. But as mentioned prior, some have special abilities. The Meat Boy gun fills the room with circular saws that bounce off the walls and hit enemies multiple times. Some guns shoot out a constant beam, and others will have special effects like poison or fire. This variability across the weapons keeps the game interesting. You never know exactly what gun you're going to find next, and you don't know how that gun will affect your approach to rooms until you get used to using it. But like Isaac, I imagine for the higher level players, the game can be fairly reset heavy. There are certain guns that are just objectively better than others, and nobody wants to be stuck with the basic starting gun for a whole floor. You might only get one key on the first floor, and instead of a weapon in the chest you choose, you might find a passive item like Table Tech that clears all enemy bullets on the screen when a table is flipped. That's definitely a situationally useful item, but I don't want fucking Table Tech as my first item. I want the gun that shoots literal planets that 3-shot the heart at early enemies. Another cool thing Enter the Gungeon does is certain guns and items synergize together to create something new from having both of them. A cool example of this is the Ant Queen. If you pick up the Gungeon Ant gun, it'll shoot little phials of flammable liquid, and after reloading, it switches to shooting out a big fireball, which will set all the liquid ablaze. If you pick up the Crown of Guns, which shoots bullets rapidly all around you, it synergizes together with the Gungeon Ant and changes the Gungeon Ant to the Ant Queen gun. This changes the projectiles from liquid and fire to just one big ant missile that does huge damage. This also changes the animation and sprite of the ant gun in the bottom right hand corner to make it larger and appear more queenly. The system definitely guides what kind of weapons the player might be trying to go for and how they approach different rooms, and adds a level of surprise when you get a synergy you weren't expecting. This creates a lot of replayability, as it is exciting to try and see how many synergies they added and the unique effects they all do. The synergies don't get as crazy as Isaac does, where almost every item affects another one, and can absolutely be game-breaking, but it keeps the same spirit of wanting to unlock and try out all these wacky different weapons to see which one works best. I should mention I haven't played a ton of Enter the Gungeon, at least not seriously. I've only beaten it like 3 times ever. It's a game I've had for years, but mostly just when I'm bored and can't think of anything else to play, I might as well run up a round of Gungeon, some in the background. I haven't even unlocked a single new character, so I would definitely take my opinion on this game with a grain of salt. The characters I do have unlocked really aren't all that different from one another. As you move away from your starting weapon and get more things by the end, the character choice really doesn't seem to matter all that much because all the main items completely change the base moveset because it's based on the gun you're holding, not the character wielding the gun. Again, this isn't necessarily a negative about the game. I have seen some gameplay of other characters, and they do seem to change things up a little bit, but you don't have that drive to unlock new characters like you do in Risk of Rain 2 or Hades or Into the Breach. So that's all I really wanted to cover in this video. I know that a lot of people are writing and making videos about roguelikes lately, but I really wanted to have a fun project to work on in my free time, and this was an idea that's been floating around in my head for about 6 months now. Thank you to the 10 of you who are actually going to watch this all the way through. I've wanted to get into writing video essays for a while, and I certainly have a lot to improve upon, but I hope at least a few people enjoyed watching this. Big thank you to SlayXC2 and Video Game Donkey for the footage I cited of theirs. You can find links to their channels and the specific videos in the description below. Also, big thank you to my old roommate and friend who designed the thumbnail for the video, and my channel icon and my channel banner. I think all of them look great. I have a few more ideas for videos that I want to get started on, so hopefully I'll have something new up in the next few months. Thanks again. Bye.